What's up, football fans? It's your boy E-Rock here to congratulate my favorite football player of all time on his induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And that player would be none other than number 80, Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice, but you're an Eagles fan. I know. The Philadelphia Eagles have been and always will be my favorite football team. But Jerry Rice has been and always will be my favorite football player. Why, you ask? Look, we can all sit around the campfire and argue about who was the best running back of all time. Maybe it was fellow enshrinee Emmitt Smith. Maybe it was Sweetness, Walter Payton. How about a little bit of Barry Sanders? Maybe it was Jim Brown. Maybe it was Gale Sayers. But nevertheless, you can all make valid arguments and points as to why any of those running backs would be number one. We can all sit around the campfire and argue about who was the best quarterback of all time. Is it Peyton Manning? Is it Joe Montana? Maybe a little Johnny Unitas? How about some Brett Favre? Maybe Dan Marino? Or possibly it could be Tom Brady. Once again, you can make valid points for any of those guys. But we cannot sit around the campfire and argue about who is the best wide receiver of all time. Because if the words Jerry and Rice don't come out of your mouth, what's the matter? You've been asleep for the last 25 years? Jerry Rice is a guy that played 20 NFL seasons, all the meanwhile only missing 10 games, led the NFL in receiving and touchdowns 6 times, and holds almost every significant receiving and all-purpose yardage record in the books. Total receptions, Jerry Rice. Total touchdowns, Jerry Rice. Receiving yards, Jerry Rice. And all-purpose yards, Jerry Rice. But holding all those records is all well and good. But the significance of those records can only be seen when you compare Jerry Rice at number 1 to whoever else is behind him at number 2. I mean, let's take a look at receptions first. Jerry Rice had 1,549 receptions in his career. Now that's number 1. Number 2, Cris Carter at 1,101. That's a difference of 448 receptions. And as a wide receiver in the NFL, if you have yourself a 100 reception season, you've had yourself a pretty damn good year. There was only 6 wide receivers that had over 100 receptions during the 2009 season. And Jerry Rice leads Cris Carter by 448. That's the margin between number 1 and number 2. Let's take a look at receiving yards. Jerry Rice, at the number 1 position in his career, had 22,895 receiving yards. In second place, Isaac Bruce, with 15,208 career receiving yards. That's a difference of 7,687 yards. Once again, if you're a wide receiver in the NFL and you have a 1,000-yard receiving season, you've had yourself a pretty good year. 7,687 yards separates Jerry Rice and the rest of the pack. Today is August 11th, 2010. The difference between Jerry Rice's career receiving yards at number 1 and Isaac Bruce at number 2 is more than what Larry Fitzgerald has for his career. Roll that one in your head for a while. You want to keep it rolling? Okay, let's keep it rolling. Let's talk about touchdowns. Jerry Rice is the NFL's all-time touchdown leader with 207 career touchdowns. Number 2, well, that would be fellow Hall of Fame inductee in the class of 2010, Emmitt Smith. Emmitt had 175 touchdowns for his career. 207 touchdowns for Jerry Rice. 175 for Emmitt Smith. That's a difference of 32 touchdowns, which, by the way, is more than Roddy White, Greg Jennings, Calvin Johnson, or Brandon Marshall have in their careers. The fact that he has these type of records is incredible, but seeing the difference between him and the number 2 position is just flat out mind-blowing. And those aren't the only major records that Jerry Rice has. Go to Wikipedia, look up Jerry Rice NFL records. It's a laundry list. There's record after touchdown record, after reception record, after yardage record. It's ridiculous. Jerry Rice has more records than it is even possible for any one person to remember. I mean, look at all this. What the hell am I supposed to do with all this? 81 go-ahead touchdowns for his career. 23 receptions of 60 or more yards. Only player to record 10 games of 100 yards in 3 different decades. Fewest games needed to reach 12,000, 13,000, 14,000, and 15,000 reception yards. Oldest player to record a 75-yard touchdown. Don't be calling Jerry Rice old. He can still suit up and play with those young guys. He has 10 consecutive seasons with at least 9 touchdown receptions. The man has 12 seasons with over 80 receptions. 14 seasons with at least 1,000 yards receiving. Jerry Rice's statistics will always be there in black and white, and will always show that he was head and shoulders above most of the greats in the game. But it was his work ethic and his team leadership that showed that he was the greatest football player of all time. You're talking about a guy in Jerry Rice who trained for this job, and it is a job, 365 days a year. Steve Young told a story that after one particular season, he went back to the San Francisco 49ers training facility to go back to his locker just to pick up a few items. When there he spotted in the back of the training facility, with no cameras, no media attention, all by himself, there was Jerry Rice running wind sprints, already preparing for the next season. Jerry Rice was a guy who used to attend and take notes during special teams meetings. Not because Jerry Rice was ever going to play special teams, but rather he wanted the people in the special teams meetings to see him there and think to themselves, if it's important enough for Jerry Rice to show up and take notes during special teams meetings, then I have to pick up my game because it's now important to me. Jerry Rice was a guy who led by example, was a great teammate and the team leader, and kept his nose clean off the field. And don't for one second think that we're talking about a guy who played 20 years ago. Jerry Rice was a first ballot Hall of Famer, which only means he hung up the cleats 5 years ago. So he was there for the Michael Irvins. He played with Terrell Owens. He was there for the Chad Ochocinco's. He was there for the Randy Mosses back when Randy Moss was still an asshole. Jerry Rice was a premier wide receiver in an era where the prima donna wide receiver came to be. But yet Jerry Rice never wanted the spotlight. He never wanted the glitz and glam. He never wanted the camera. He never wanted the credit. But rather, Jerry Rice wanted to be the best teammate and the best Jerry Rice that he could be. And is it any coincidence the greatest wide receiver of all time happens to be one of the most unselfish, well-disciplined, and hardest working wide receivers to ever play the game? Is that a coincidence? Or is that the way it should be? Emmitt Smith said during his Hall of Fame speech that he used to write down his goals. He wanted to be the league's all-time leading rusher. He wanted to be a Super Bowl MVP. Jerry Rice never wrote down his goals. Jerry Rice's only goal was to be the best Jerry Rice that he could be. And he wanted it more and was going to work harder than anybody to get there. And in doing so, became the single greatest football player to ever grace an NFL field. Congratulations on your induction to the Hall of Fame, Jerry Rice. You deserve it.